I'm going to introduce our first speaker. His name is Chaitanya Massera. He grew up homesteading between an herb-covered orchard and a dusty mesa, where he learned a lot about what plants need to thrive. His experience growing cannabis deepened his relationship to the soil, discovering how much the life below the plants impacts their potential for growth and vitality. Compost tea is a microbial extract that increases vital nutrients and minerals in your food by feeding the soil to increase soil vitality. This method is based on Elaine Ingram's research and teaching. So his talk is called Exploring the Soil Food Web with Compost Tea, and it includes a demonstration. And I will turn it over to you, Che. Cool. You have your mic.
Right. Yep. All right. Nice to meet you all. Glad you guys came. This is so back. I'll kind of give you a little history of my own personal experience with compost tea. I moved out to California around 2008. Kind of involved with the medical marijuana industry, and growing and learning about the needs of cannabis as well as many other plants and just general agriculture of how to grow food in large yields and kind of small plots of land. I came across some amazing teachers that were students under Elaine Ingham, and basically I would purchase this tea that they would show up with their truck with a similar sized barrel in the back of their truck, and they would, sell me their tea for sometimes I think it was $30 a gallon or something crazy. And first I started just buying from them, and then it started catching on that we can just make this stuff in our own backyard. We don't need, we just need to build a brewer or purchase a brewer. So then I started talking to the guys that were delivering, and they decided they wanted to sell me a brewer. They kind of got over the delivery business of moving around this bubbling liquid tea. And the guy that I first met that was teaching me it, he would literally try to prove to me that it was super good by literally drinking it, which is I would not recommend. But it has a lot of similar stuff in it as what our gut biome has, so there's a lot of bacillus, there's a lot of beneficial microbes in there, beneficial protozoas, nematodes, which I wouldn't recommend eating too many of. They're like little miniature worms that you can't see. So in that, I started going deep into that, and I took some classes with these guys, and they basically showed me how to make a really powerful tea that was literally double to quadrupling my yield. Not only just with my marijuana, but I would put it on my raspberries or my tomatoes or whatever I was growing in my backyard, and it would just unbelievably produce large amounts of food. And the food would often have way more flavor and more bright colors because the minerals and nutrients from the compost tea make it bioavailable for the plant to uptake. So you get way more growth, you get more flowers, you just get the whole thing without really adding a traditional agricultural NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. You're basically adding microbes to the soil that then bring in the nitrogen or break down the sand, literally, and turn it into phosphorus, feeding it sand or rocks. The mycelium and will literally eat the sand and rocks, and then it'll make it more bioavailable for the plants. Because there's phosphorus everywhere, but it doesn't necessarily mean your plants are going to uptake it. There's hundreds of varieties of phosphorus, and some of those phosphorus varieties pretty much need mycelium to break it down and make it bioavailable for the plant. So these guys were telling us we don't need to add as much NPK. You can and do that essentially, but you can do back and forth NPK, fertilizer, compost tea, fertilizer, compost tea. But most fertilizers, even organic ones, are too much salts, and they kill the microbiome in the soil. So it takes a while then for the soil to rebuild. But when you use compost tea, you literally are inoculating back the microbiome and getting amazing yields. And Lane Ingham is one of the major pioneers in this. Our friend Bob, Farmer Bob Pedersen, he's not here right now. He thought he would be here, but he worked with Elaine Ingham, had the honor to work with her on some projects in Texas. So he's been filling me on a lot more information. He's a great teacher and has a lot of experience with that. He actually showed me how to create trichoderma, which is another form of another type of another type of mushroom. So basically, mycorrhizas are a form of mushrooms that they're not fruiting. They don't fruit above ground. They don't fruit below ground. They attach themselves to a root, and then they extend the root sometimes many feet. And you'll see it when you dig up a very healthy plant. You'll see these little webbings that come off of the roots. And a lot of people might think it is a part of the plant, but it's actually not. It's its own entity essentially, and it will take nutrients from the ground and then feed it to the plant, as well as it will actually communicate with other fungus families, fungi. It will communicate with the other fungi, and that will also take from, so if a tree has excess nutrients of any sort, it could actually take from the tree and go through the mycorrhiza from the tree to the mycelium, back to the mycorrhiza to the plant, and then feed it to the plant. And one of the clear sightings of this that we see in old growth forests is saplings that get no sunlight. They've actually been able to trace the nutrition that these saplings are getting. No sunlight, but they're growing really healthy as if they're in full sun. You see this in the redwoods, you see this in the Washington state, all through the old growth forests. They'll basically, the grandmother trees or grandfather trees that are sometimes up to a mile away will have excess nutrients from getting way too much sun on top of a hill or whatever, and then they will feed that nutrition through the ectomycorrhiza into the mycelium, and then feed it to the or the ecto again to a small tree, or even to other plants, which is the endomycorrhizas. And I'm going to go a little bit more into what endo is, what beneficial is, what non-beneficial, what aerobic is, what non-aerobic is. These are all kind of important things to know when you're kind of diving deep into the soil biology. Let's see, I kind of have, let's see. So I'm kind of I'm going to add a little bit of this seaweed because it can, the soluble seaweed to the water here. All these ingredients that I have here, you might think, oh, you have to go to a store and buy it, but it's actually not necessarily true. Even though this is ocean soluble seaweed, this is probably one of the microbes' favorite foods. If you were trying to make this locally, you could use comfrey or even algae from the bottom of a pond, like high dense nutrient plants, nettles, things like this. You can soak them for a couple days and make like a kind of an anaerobic brew, and then you can create something really similar to what this is, and with a high potassium, but mostly it's the micronutrients that we're going for. We're not really going for the NPK here. We're going for the micronutrients that are inside of the soluble seaweed. This is kind of an easy way to do it. You can go to any garden store. Oftentimes you get this brand. There's other brands of soluble seaweed. You want to make sure there's very little nitrogen or phosphorus in this, because that's the way you know it's pure, and you want to check the ingredients, make sure it's not mixed with other things, unless they're beneficial for the tea brew. But because it takes probably 5 minutes or so to properly absorb. So this I will you can mix, for this size barrel, they recommend about a half cup. I've done even more. A lot of times I eye it and just kind of give it a, so this stuff will stick to the sides of the tank. It will stick to your hands. It'll literally make the cracks in your hands black for days. So you don't want to massage this one into the water. I used to do that, but it's terrible for your skin, really. The other way, again, is to make a high concentration of comfrey or nettles or any other very high nutrient dense plant. Moringa, there's a bunch of them out there in the world, but comfrey is probably the more common one here. There's also some relatives to comfrey like uh, borage. There's a couple different borage relatives too in this local area that grow wild. You could also use borage family stuff that also has very high nutrient dense in there. So I'm gonna let that sit for a second so it gets fully absorbed. So what does compost tea basically do? I guess I kind of already said it, but it basically, we're really focusing on the soil, not the plants. Because if the soil is super active, super nutrient dense, the plants are going to thrive way beyond your expectations. Plants that would, I would say in the marijuana industry, I would grow a plant. Maybe I can get a pound out of that soil mass. By adding the compost tea with the same soil mass, I could probably get two pounds if I expand the soil mass, especially with marijuana, because it has a lot of outward roots. I could increase that same plant that I would get like maybe a pound from up to like 5 to 8 pounds, which is insane because you're talking like a 15-foot to 18-foot plant. You need scaffolding sometimes to get to the top to deal with it. It's not an easy thing. Sometimes when they get too big, it's almost too much work, right? But super powerful. And with pests especially, so there's what they call trichoderma. I didn't purchase any items with trichoderma, but Bob is an amazing master of trichoderma. I've seen him culture it really well and then literally screen it and make his own trichoderma extract. So trichoderma is not a mycorrhiza. Mycorrhizas it acts similar, except mycorrhizas grow on the roots, like I talked before, and there's two different kinds. One's endo and one's ecto. Ecto are for trees, for hard roots, bushes, maybe strawberries, anything that's like a hard brown root is an ecto. Endos are endoderma, ectoderma. Endomycorrhizas are grass, marijuana, tomatoes, squash, corn. Like most of our vegetables are endo, maybe even all, actually probably all vegetables. The berries are all in the ecto family. But again, they communicate with each other. So when you're trying to inoculate, say, an agricultural field or even your own backyard, you want to have a little bit of endo and a little bit of ecto because you don't really know if the local willow or the local plants are getting excess nutrients. And if they are, they could be actually feeding your plants, literally, which is pretty impressive and magical in many ways. And there's a bunch of information about this online under the soil food web. You can type in, learn so much more about how all this process works. But endo mycorrhiza and ectomycorrhiza don't go crazy in water, right? So we're not gonna put the mycorrhizas in here, and that's why I don't have it on the ingredients list until right at the very end. So tomorrow we're gonna give out this tea. So if anyone has an empty gallon or whatever, they can take it home and experiment with it. It lasts about 4 to 5 hours, as long as it's not a hot car. If it's a hot car, it might only last about an hour. And we're talking about the bacteria, the protozoa, and the nematodes, like bacillus and all the other bacterias that are coming out of the worm castings and out of the mushroom compost. And so the mushrooms won't really expand too much in here. You're pretty much just you're spreading out their spore structure. So when it's in the water, it spreads, but they don't die off in here. When a mycorrhiza is more sensitive and it needs more direct feeding. So what they've learned in the last 15-ish years is that mycorrhizas are best to be added in right at the end because this is the food for the mycorrhiza, the fish, the kelp or comfrey, and such. So that's yeah. So you want to be able to feed the mycorrhizas immediately when you add them in. If you're doing a large plot of land, like a large agricultural plot, you want to make sure the ground is well moistened and there is some sort of basic broken down plant matter in that soil for everything to grab onto. And you can dilute this, like 50 gallon can be diluted into like 500 gallons literally, or you can go direct, but also you really don't need much. And then the mycorrhiza you want to add right at the end to inoculate into the soil. Otherwise it won't survive. Essentially it needs something to grab onto, that's ideally a broken down plant matter or roots that are living. Because if they're living, it's going to take in right away, and you'll see overnight, you'll see change in your plants, especially with the mycorrhizas. And they will increase in your soil 100-fold with the food in there. If you don't have the food in there, the mycorrhiza might only very slowly increase as the season goes on, and it might decrease if you let the field dry out too much. So to really get the full maximum potential out of your mycorrhizas, here, I'm going to pass this around just so people can look at the different endomycorrhizas and the ectomycorrhizas. It's really fine writing. You might need to take a picture. Yeah, the glomus family. There's a bunch of different families in there. Some of the mycorrhizas build the immune system by giving it all the nutrients the plant needs. They kind of communicate with the plant what it needs, and it'll build it by giving it certain micronutrients that get the plant up to a full strength. Others will retain water, so the water doesn't evaporate. They'll actually kind of create a webbing to keep the water in the ground, which is pretty impressive. The other really beautiful thing I love about mycorrhizas is people talk a lot about like carbon sequestration from the trees and the plants, but the reality is without the mycorrhizas, those carbons actually just go right back into the air, into the atmosphere. They don't actually get locked in as well. I mean, there's a little bit that get locked in with the rotting decay of roots, but the mycorrhizas, when they're attached to the trees or the plants, they actually store the carbons in the ground. And after the tree dies, those carbons stay there, and the mycorrhizas will then search for more living plants, more living trees, to then keep storing more carbon. So it's one of the biggest ways to carbon sequestrate, to bring the carbon levels down in the air, if we're worried about that. Some people aren't, is by integrating mycorrhizas into your general gardening plots and stuff, because you're going to be able to actually trap a lot more carbons and increase your soil vitality, because those carbons are also what you want in the ground to create a really healthy, rich soil. Mycorrhizas generally feed mostly on amino acids and micronutrients, and that's why we would use the seaweed, the comfrey, and the fish. So fish hydrolysate, you can't use fish emulsion because they take out the fats and the oils, which removes a lot of the beneficial amino acids that the mycorrhizas and the mushrooms need to thrive, as well as the beneficial bacteria. So you really do need fish hydrolysate, or we did this in the last demo I did of this. We cut up a fish and we blend it up in a Vitamix and just made a puree with the bones, the guts, everything in there. And that is basically exactly what fish hydrolysate is. So the idea is to get the full spectrum of the fish, not just like, not the emulsion, because the emulsion, they basically take out a lot of good stuff out of there. And that's one of the reasons it's a lot cheaper than fish hydrolysate. So yeah, that would make the mycorrhizas go wild and the fungus go wild, as well as the protozoa, nematode, and the beneficial bacteria. I'm going to go into bacteria for a second. When you have something that's sitting for a long time, water, a swamp, maybe sewage, these kind of things, they're building anaerobics, bacteria. Some anaerobics can be good. but most aren't. But when you dump an anaerobic into a beneficial area, it will, like if you dump an anaerobic onto a plant directly, the plant might die, might get molds, might have a lot of problems. But within like 3 to 4 months, the ecosystem around that, where you dumped that anaerobic bacteria, will then transform into something good. But if you're trying to feed a crop, you don't want that. You don't want to wait 3-4 months. Like if you have time, like my dad used to ferment all kinds of nasty stuff, and it would just be this really like putrid smell. And then he would dump it out on his trees. The trees would struggle for a little bit, and then months later, the trees would be stoked. They'd be happy because there's the environment changes the anaerobics back into other things, and the anaerobics get eaten by the protozoas and the nematodes. But it's not what we're going for here. So what we're doing is aerobic. So aerobic is like a river. Essentially, the best way to explain compost tea in nature is when a flood happens, you have all this nutrient-dense humus from the mountains and old plants and stuff like that are all getting washed up, and they get turned, and lots of air mixing them, and then there's worm castings getting mixed in from the mountains and everything, and then you get this flood of like nutrient-dense, basically water that comes down from the mountains. A lot of times it does more destruction than good because it will wipe out things that we need. But essentially what we're trying to mimic here is similar to a flood, where there's just a bunch of microbes and a bunch of plants getting mixed in, bubbled, and some dead fish, basically, and then there's humic acid, which up in these mountains there's actually lots of pockets of humic acid. There's a name for the crystal. I was just looking that up. Nope. One second. I should have took a screenshot of that. No, I did. Okay. Yeah. So, yeah, humic has fulvic acid and humin in it, and leonardite is what it is in the mountains. And this stuff here was found outside of Taos. I'll pass this around too so people can kind of get an idea of it before I use it up. This was found outside of Taos, and when my friend found it, he was selling this for years for tons of money. I don't know where he disappeared off to, but I stockpiled on quite a bit of it. It's really potent. So his stuff is like 85% humic acid. And so inside the humic acid, there's fulvic acid and there's humin, which are also really important. So what humic acid does at a base level is humic acid basically is kind of like the lubricant for the cell wall to all life, to plant life, to human life. You can buy humic acid to take internally, like extracts of it that are like food grade. It basically coats the cell wall, giving it kind of oil to the key inlets of the nutrients, the amino acids, the vitamins that are absorbing into your cell wall or into your plant cell wall. So when you have humic acid in there, it's not so much a food for the microbes. Well, it helps the microbes because it also helps them absorb their food, right? So the more humic acid in your soil, the microbes, the mushrooms, pretty much everything is able to absorb more nutrition and then thrive more and do its job better, essentially. So that's why we use humic acid in compost tea. It definitely does miracles in many ways, and makes the cell walls a lot stronger to handle resistance against pests. So bacteria, beneficial, non-beneficial. When you're doing aerobic, you're pretty much always beneficial. It's kind of hard to create a non-beneficial, except if you let this sit for like 3-4 days, you might start getting into a place where it doesn't smell right. If we do this right today, tomorrow this should smell actually really good. Right away, it's going to smell like fish and seaweed, and it's like this weird ocean smell. And then after like tomorrow, it should smell like more like a fresh breeze on the ocean, or maybe even a fresh breeze in the mountains if you're using more mountain-based stuff. I got the soluble seaweed and this fish, which are both ocean-based, so it's going to smell a little bit more like a fresh breeze on the ocean versus a swamp of rotting fish on the ocean. So if it smells like bad, then we know it's bad. But Bob was saying there's been some therapeutic uses for the smell of nature like that, like creating this kind of scent that can actually do all kinds of therapy for people. I don't really understand what he meant by that, but he was talking about that last time. But I definitely feel it when I know my tea's good when I can smell it and I'm like, oh wow, that smells great, you know. And if it doesn't smell super good, it doesn't mean it's bad necessarily, but you may not want to directly feed it onto a plant. You might want to like feed it in some soil that you let sit for a couple of weeks or whatever, and then feed it to the plants. Would be the other route with that. Worm castings are filled with nematodes, a little bit of protozoa, actually a good amount of protozoa, and tons of bacteria, beneficial bacteria. All these things are really important. So how the soil food web is basically the nematodes eat the fungus and the protozoa, and the protozoa will eat the bacteria and the nematodes. And so they're all like kind of eating each other. And then when they do that, they're excreting nitrogen and micronutrients that the plants need. So it's like this whole environment that's happening underground where they're basically all eating each other, feeding each other, and creating like a perfect web of nutrition and basically perfect environment for the plants to thrive at their highest potential. One thing that I found really interesting is Elaine Ingeman, because of her work, she was able to prove to like Driscoll's strawberry company, berry company, that they could yield 2 to 3 times more strawberries and have better flavor, more dark colors in their strawberries and raspberries than the hydroponic systems that they were using prior. So Driscoll's went from like massive hydroponic systems in the early 2000s. So around 2010, they got rid of everything. They went full compost tea with all their stuff. Even their non-organic has compost tea in it. And how that works is, again, they feed the NPK, they feed the nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, what the plant needs, you know, like almost like a clinical IV or something. They're giving it exactly what it needs for the plant, but it never actually gives it fully what it needs. So then they compost tea it. It actually breaks down all that stuff and then it feeds it to the plant. But then when they put the NPK back in, the salts will kill a lot of the mycelium and the biology. So they're rotating between microbial extracts, compost tea, and feed. A lot of the apple companies, I don't know if you guys remember like how big an apple was, or 10 minutes? Okay. Apples and stuff and fruits that were organic were actually a lot smaller. I don't know if anyone remembers that. Like in the early 2000s, they were actually not as big. They're a lot, you know, like more dangly and smaller fruits and stuff. And since the compost tea has been integrated into mass agriculture across California, especially, and Washington, all the fruits are getting way bigger and a lot more nutrient dense and more flavorful. And organic, actually, you can taste the difference more so than used to. Yeah, so that's my own personal thing. I'm going to quickly just kind of show everyone what we're doing here. So I got this soluble seaweed, and we're going to put this in this water here. And so we want this to bubble for, if we're over 90 degrees outside, 12 hours is max. If we're between 75 and 90, 24 hours is good. Under 75 to like, it's like 60 to 75, you can bubble it for 72 plus hours. And or no, 42 plus hours, and then 72. If you're like down to 40 degrees to like 60, you want to bubble it for around 72. So we're just going to do a 24-hour bubble. It's probably going to get a little warm in the heat, so the microbes will be taking off pretty well. I'm going to pour that in there. And I'm going to... So each... a lot of people that do compost tea foliar feed, and I didn't bring the right screens, unfortunately. I kind of spaced on getting the right mesh, but if you want a foliar feed, you want to make sure this is well meshed. So if anyone does collect this tomorrow, make sure that they screen it if they're going to use foliaring. And foliaring is super important because you want to get microbes on both sides, especially on the bottom side of a leaf. And if you add trichoderma in there, it can dominate, which is not necessarily a mycorrhiza, but it's very similar in its form. It grows on manure. Oftentimes when you see a manure pile, you'll find like white powdery or blue, gray powdery stuff growing on the manure. That's trichoderma. So you can actually strain that off, try to get as least manure, and you can get this powder from there. Bob taught me this. And then you can add it into your compost tea and you get trichoderma. That's really good for this desert environment because it's dominant. If you're like up in the mountains, I wouldn't be adding trichoderma because it could dominate some of your natural environment. Instead, I would go gather underneath the healthiest tree and the healthiest bush. Like the tree again is going to have the ecto mycorrhizas that are in there naturally, or the bush, like you see a field of grass and some of the grass is taller, maybe there's like a huge alfalfa plant. Dig around that because you're going to find the beneficial mushrooms, the beneficial mycelium, mycorrhizas, protozoas. Everything is already happening under that healthy plant, right? And you take a couple, like a quart of that soil. Oftentimes you'll see, I'm going to pass this around. This is like a mix of possibly a local trichoderma to my neighborhood, but definitely a bunch of mycelium that was growing under this like webbing. The white powdery stuff can be mycelium. It could be a bunch of different things that are beneficial, but it's definitely what you're going for. You're going for this kind of like rotten compost. Everyone's seen it, I'm sure, when they've moved forest floors. So we're trying to get that in our local neighborhood, the healthiest in your local environment, tree or grass plot or like bush. Search under that, find a good amount. Don't take it all because the plants need it there. And just try to take around a quart or get it from multiple areas in your area. And then that's what we're going to be multiplying. The mushrooms don't multiply so much in here, but they don't die. The nematodes don't multiply in here, but they don't die, but they get well dispersed when they're dispersed out, right? With the liquid versus doing a powder or a small inoculation thing. So we're going to do basically, we're doing like a half cup to a cup of soluble seaweed, a quart of the mushroom compost that's ideally local to your region, and then a half cup of humic acid. I'm going to go ahead and throw that in here, get it absorbing. And then a half cup to a cup. It really depends on how much you have and what you can afford. And then we're going to do a cup of fish hydrosylate. I'll add that at the very end because I don't want to touch that. I'll smell like fish all day. It's hard to get off your clothing. It's a really disgusting smell. But it will transform once it goes into the tea, which is super amazing. Is there any questions before we go too far? What'd you say? So it's fish hydrosylate, you want to do a cup for 55 gallons. So if you're doing a 5-gallon, I would say like 4 tablespoons maybe, or something like that, or even a couple tablespoons. Soluble seaweed, and you definitely have to have a bubbler. You want that bubbling. A quart of worm castings, I recommend. Some people say half a cup. I don't think that's nearly enough in my opinion. Um, but yeah, I usually use about a quart of vermiculture if you have your own worm castings, or uh, a regular worm casting. And then a cup of humic acid. Oh, and a cup of um, seaweed for a 55, about a cup. You could do a half cup. It's kind of variable. I mean, it really depends on, I would experiment, see what you like the most and what really works for your garden. You'll notice a difference right away if you're bubbling. You can also do this without a bubbler, and just by mixing all this stuff into a bucket and then add the mycorrhiza, mix it in really well and dump it on your plants. But you're not gonna see a quick difference. You're not gonna see overnight difference. You're gonna see a difference within like about a week before it all to do its work in the soil. If you were to grow mycorrhiza, it's a whole different thing. You can look it up online, but you can grow mycorrhiza in your local environment by feeding it oats and molasses, apparently. I haven't done this yet, but they use these closed bins and they kind of turn it, keep it out of the sun, and you'll see the mycorrhiza grow into these like webs, looking for roots, essentially.
How long does that mixture last, and then how often?
Some people do it once a year if they're not feeding fertilizer to it. If you're using fertilizer, I would do it after the fertilizing. You fertilize and then do it a little bit after. It's always better to wet your ground really well before adding this because it'll go deeper. If it just gets this much of the soil, the sun's going to kill most of what you just put in. So you want your soil to be fairly wet before, or you dilute this. As a ganja grower, I've done it weekly. I've even done it to the point where like I didn't even do water because I was doing so well with it. But now it's like financially this doesn't make sense, or physical time doesn't make sense. 5 minutes. So yeah, now I put the humic acid in here, shake that up a little bit. Let's see, I'm gonna stick. Is there anything I haven't talked about? I'm adding a little bit of these guys' local shilajit, because shilajit also has humic acid in it and a bunch of micronutrients. It doesn't hurt to add things like that. There's ton of other things that you could find out there in the world that, maybe gold or silver you can throw in there, whatever you really want to add into your soil. But if you're just doing it for like local reasons, you don't really need to do that. The main thing I think is making sure you have a healthy amount of mycelium and a really good worm castings. I don't prefer this. This is just what I was available to get. Where I was at is this type of worm casting. It's better to get ones that are like, these guys will use cardboard and stuff to feed the worms. It's better to get like, more high quality, but this is fairly high quality for what we have available. They add a lot of sand to it too, which is kind of lame. So at the bottom of the brewer, I'll end up with a bunch of sand. So I usually use about a quart or a couple handfuls, which is similar for me, 2 big handfuls. And yeah, you can kind of, if anyone wants to look at the worm castings, they can come see how much sand they put in it too. But you want those like nice little balls. Sometimes you'll find it in the mountains. I've found one of my favorite places to gather, if anyone can find like 100-year-old mill, like that, because back in the day, National Forest had mills all over the frickin' place. And if you find one of those spots or find an old map, that is like, that a mill can inoculate probably a whole state. It's insane, because there's like sometimes like 20 feet deep of just worm castings and mushroom compost that's been building for years. It's the best humus you can probably get. Any good humus in the mountains is also really good to add in, about a quart for the 55. Mushroom compost, same thing. Usually I'll put this in a bag and I'll squeeze the worm castings and really make sure it doesn't drop, and it becomes like a nice brew. I'm just kind of putting it at the bottom, and I'm just gonna kind of massage it like this, kind of getting the tea to break down into like a nice black slime. I want the water to look as dark as I can get it. So I'll just massage it for a while. Definitely easier with what they call a brewer bag, or you can use paint bags. They don't last as long. They kind of get eaten up by the microbes. But a lot of people will put the tea bag and they'll hang the tea bag in here and let it brew after you massage it really well. The massaging is super important though. They did studies on whether you can not massage it or do massage it. You're going to get easy 10 to 100 times more biology in there. The cool thing about bacteria is like every 15 minutes, the handfuls of the beneficials that I put in here are gonna double every 15 minutes. So within 24 hours, you're already, and that's at a temperature of like 70 to 90, but they still will double pretty fast. And you're gonna literally 100-fold is what a general, is what generally happens. You can also, my friend used to have a microscope, and we would like take tea samples and soil samples and like lay it out in these little flats, and we'd be able to see the protozoa count, the nematode count, and the bacteria. The bacteria, you don't really know what it is, but you just know it's bacteria because it's these little dots. But the nematodes and the protozoas you can fully see. Is there any other questions before I wrap it up? I would do an extract first, even like a horsetail extract, where you let it sit for 48 hours, let it get anaerobic, or maybe even more. I mean, you could probably let it sit for a week, let it get anaerobic, keep it living. Put it in first, and then the aerobic atmosphere with the air bubbling, or maybe even put a aerobic thing in a bucket and just get it aerobic, and then you add it. After it's been aerated for probably like 6 to 12 hours, then you're gonna have a very to get a good extraction, you wanna go more anaerobic, which is interesting. So you wanna let it sit even in the sun and get it like fermenting, and then you bubble it, and that will kind of get rid of anything that's not beneficial. And then you can put that in your barrel, or you put it in the barrel first and then wait a little while before you add the mushroom compost. But it's definitely a good food. So if it's really hot out, you don't got much time. If it's like 70 degrees or like how it is now, we'd probably get a day out of it if I turned off the bubbler. But after, you really only got you really should do it within 3 to 5 hours. Is really recommended, and ideally right away, because aerobic bacteria start dying and anaerobic start forming. Yep. So I got this really dark now. It's like black mud. I'm gonna put that in there. Any other questions? Mm-hmm. Yep. You could put more. Like it doesn't hurt to put more. Yeah, vermiculture doesn't always have a lot of castings as much as you want. I would double to quadruple the amount of vermiculture if you don't see like black balls and like really black soil in your vermiculture, then I would put more. What'd you say? Screens. Yeah, they lay out screens and cardboard. They feed it. It's really weird process that what these guys do. I've looked into their company. There's better brands that don't add sand and don't feed it cardboard. But yeah. Yeah, you can. You can, like oftentimes I would dilute like a gallon into a 5-gallon bucket. You could dilute that up to like probably 10 times the amount of water. So you could do 500 gallons for that amount right there. Especially if you're doing an agricultural plot or you're like trying to fix a field or a lawn, it's probably better to dilute. And it's also, make sure you pre-water before doing a large, like if you're doing a large plot, or it's best to always pre-water because it's going to go deeper. But yeah, it can be diluted and quite a bit. But yeah, again, definitely don't leave it in the barrel for more than 72. 72, a lot of people prefer. 48 is what I like. 24 works. This will be a 24 tomorrow by the time people grab it.
So this will be doubling, like you said, for the next 24 hours?
Yeah, correct.
We'll come back around tomorrow after the first demonstration to 11:30. And Trey will be out there and available for more questions, more dialogue, continuous water bottles that we're going to have, or with other guys on YouTube. Yeah, there'll be more opportunity for direct dialogue tomorrow, and of course if you find it, but
Yeah, I'll be around. I'll be checking on this frequently, and I don't mind walking over here. If anyone has questions, we can come look at the products. I can tell you other products I recommend, and or how to make these products is the ideal thing. Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you all so much.